Part 2. In this nugget, we continue our discussion of group policy objects, and this is part 2. We start off with just a basic policy review. We've kind of skipped around policies. Now we'll kind of go through them a little bit more systematically, at least in terms of one note at a time. We can't address all 800 of the policies, but we'll address them at least a piece at a time or a chunk at a time. And then part of that's going to be an address of the security items that appear within the computer configuration. It's important to know kind of where to go for various security settings that you might need to know about. Also, certificate auto-enrollment is a part of security as well. We need to know how to auto-enroll both the computer certificates as well as user certificates, and I'll take you through some of those settings. We'll take a look at software update services settings as well, so that we can make sure that our client computers are up to date with the latest security patches and updates. Also, a very powerful feature of group policy objects is software distribution and the ability to update or upgrade one version of software to a newer version of the software. We'll take a look at that, as well as how to prevent people from running various kinds of software, various versions of software, through software restrictions. In our last night, we talked a lot about policies, a lot of the different things that can be done with policies, what administrative templates are, and things of this nature. But now I think it's probably a good time to just step back, take another look at group policy, and we'll just look at the Phoenix policy here, which is empty, and we'll just look at it as a good example of what kind of policies are here. And I'm just going to kind of go through these one at a time with you and identify the basic overall categories. Now, given the fact that there are over 600 administrative templates and probably a couple hundred more additional settings, and you might even have more additional settings if you have additional ADM files that have been imported because of an application that you're using, for example. Well, you can see how there's quite a few policies there. So we're just going to kind of give you the broad stroke here for all of these things. First of all, in the software settings, there's a software installation setting for both user and computer. This is what's going to allow us to publish or assign applications to users and or computers. Now we'll be talking about that more in depth in a little while here, so we'll go ahead and leave that for the time being. And then with the Windows settings under the computer configuration here, we have a startup and a shutdown script, so that during startup you can run a script, or during shutdown you can run a script. Of course, the startup script will run before the logon script for the user, and the shutdown script runs after the log off script for the user, because the users have corresponding log on and log off scripts. Now these scripts actually appear in the sysvol directory. In our last lecture we took a look at the sysvol and we looked at where the ADM files and all the accompanying helper files for group policy are located, and your scripts will also be located in those sysvol locations. We also took a look at security settings in previous nuggets, where we looked at things such as account policies like your password and account lockout, and there are also local policies such as your auditing policy. Now, audit policy typically is not defined on workstations and member servers, but all of these things will be defined on a domain controller, especially things such as the account logon events, because of course that's a sensitive thing, and we need to be able to keep track of who's logging on and when. That way we can keep track of things such as hacking attempts and brute force hacks and all that kind of stuff. Audit account management's important, because of course you want to see who's been changing group memberships. Maybe somebody's been adding someone to the domain admin security group and potentially compromising security in your organization. So that's what that kind of thing is for. Here's another important one: audit object access. Now for this one, we can go ahead and configure this to define the policy settings for success and or failure as we need. Now what's useful for this is we can then track to see how much, for example, a printer is being used. Maybe my users keep saying, hey, that printer is way overtaxed, there's always a big line behind it and all that stuff. Well, we can start now to audit that object access, that printer's access. Then over time we can see exactly how much it's being used. We can do the same thing for files and folders, and that's probably a more common usage of auditing object access. So now that I've configured that policy, I have a computer account that's subject to that policy, because the policy is linked to the Phoenix OU, and I have the Phoenix Computers organizational unit underneath that, and there's client 01 where I've moved that computer account. Now here I've got IT department benefits, and this is a highly sensitive document that identifies all of the IT department's various benefits, and of course there are a myriad of benefits we get. So I'm going to go ahead and protect that to see that nobody fiddles with it, or at least I know when someone tries to mess with it. So to do that, you go to the properties of that document or folder, doesn't matter, and go to the security and advanced. And in this case, we're going to go to the auditing tab and click on add, and I want to see anytime any domain user, for example, tries to access this. Maybe they tried to read the data successfully or failed to read the data, write data, success or failure, or maybe anytime they try to delete that document, success or failure, any of those kinds of things. So those are some things that we might want to keep an eye out for, and you saw some of the other ones there as well, which pretty well explain themselves. So now once I've done that, I can click OK through all of this, and now when I double click on this document to access it, And so here we see the IT department benefits. And of course, we have to have these kind of benefits like plenty of Coke, Cheetos, pizza, Doritos, chips, all that kind of good stuff for you so that we can at least stay awake for these 30 hours of overtime each week. And then for those people that don't have a life, like IT folks that are working all the time, we get membership in all these, kind of geeky fan clubs and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, we see this document, and maybe we want to make a change to it. So maybe here we added to our own benefits. We gave ourselves 4 weeks of vacation in the Caribbean. Sounds pretty good. So anyway, now we've done that, we're going to go ahead and save this document. And now if I go to my computer and go to the Computer Management Console to go to the Event Viewer, then we're going to be able to see that we have indeed been able to track that there was a change to that document. So if I go to Security right here, and then double-click on one of these success audits, we'll see that, and by the way, over here it says Object Access, and it tells you who accessed it and from which computer they accessed it. Then I'll be able to identify what happened. For example, here it tells me that I was reading data, I was listing something in the directory, and I was using the Explorer interface from within Windows to do that. I accessed the Company Secrets folder to access the IT Benefits document here. So that's what auditing has done for me. It's helped me to identify exactly what we were looking at. Now, other things from within the Group Policy Object Editor, under User Rights Assignment, there's a whole bunch of different settings within this, and you should just kind of go through this and get a good idea of the kinds of things that are in this. But this is the stuff that will allow you to, for example, load and unload device drivers. If you're somebody that installs a lot of printers and the printer drivers are not already on the machine, then you need to have permission to load and unload those device drivers. And you can define the policy settings and add a specific user or group account, for example, to be able to do that. You might have to have the ability to shut down the system. Not everybody might have that ability on certain systems. So you might want to give someone the capability of doing that kind of thing. And then under security options, there's a whole bunch of other settings, again, that you should kind of just go through. You don't need to memorize all these, but take a look at some of these. For example, we were looking at smart cards earlier in this series. We took a look at, for example, at interactive logon for the smart card removable behavior. What happens if you take the smart card out? Does it lock the workstation, or does it force a log off, or does nothing happen? So you can define those kinds of settings. Here we can also configure things such as the event log, such as how large it gets and what the retention policy is for it, whether it overwrites old event logs or whether it shuts down the system if it gets full, all those kinds of things. And those are all the security settings we need to be aware of for the group policy objects. Now let's also go down to auto-enrollment settings under the public key policies. This is going to be important to know because increasingly many computers and users are using certificates to validate their identity, to use IPsec transactions, to use VPN connection, smart cards, all different kinds of things that are necessary in order for certificate usage. Now, in terms of the computer, it'll be very useful for you if you can automatically enroll your computers so that they automatically receive certificates once they've authenticated themselves to the domain. And we can configure these auto-enrollment policies to enroll the certificate automatically, and then to renew, update, or remove certain kinds of certificates, as well as to update certificates that use Type 2, that's what this really refers to, Type 2 certificate templates, which is a special kind of a template that you can modify so that you can specify what that template is used for, what that certificate is going to be used for. And then to complete the picture, we need to also go to automatic certificate request settings so that we can start a new automatic certificate request. And then once we start this wizard, we're going to identify that it wants to retrieve a computer certificate. Now there's some other special purpose ones, but this is going to be the one you're going to be using 9 times out of 10. And you can see the intended purpose. That's for client authentication and server authentication. So that's, in other words, mutual authentication. I can prove who I am, and I can use my certificate to prove that you are indeed the server that you say you are that's attempting to authenticate me, and you're not intercepting credentials illegitimately. And I forgot to click on it to select it, so I'll select it and click on next, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Now we're going to have automatically retrieved certificates for our computer accounts. Now, there may also be situations in which you need to configure a trusted root CA. So if I don't have a root CA that's already installed by default, and by the way, all current Windows systems have a list of trusted root certificate authorities already listed, and that's just mostly public root CAs, such as VeriSign, Thought, other kinds of those folks out there on the public internet that have CAs. What we can also do, however, is to import trusted root CAs, and then you can again start another wizard like you just saw me start here, and then you can browse for an exported certificate that has been previously made. For example, here I've got a certificate that I exported at a previous point in time, and this is just DC Nugget 1, it's our certificate for that. Now let's go ahead and click on basically just next through everything here. And then once I've finished that, the import is successful. Now what's going to happen is this certificate is actually stored in Active Directory in the policy here, and now it's going to automatically be downloaded to all of my clients. And the reason why that's important is if I have client A trying to authenticate or check some credentials out for client B, then they both have to have a common root CA that they both trust, and the common root CA will then basically be the final authority in validating both those parties' identity. Now, as long as I'm on auto-enrollment for certificates, let's skip on down to the user configuration where we can see that we can also configure user accounts to automatically receive certificates as well. To do that, we'll go into security settings down here as well in public key policies. This one's really pretty easy. You just double-click on auto-enrollment settings and select to enroll certificates automatically. And again, we have the same kind of options we had for the computer accounts as well. And that's pretty much all it is for the user part of things. Well, now that I've gone ahead and configured the auto-enrollment settings for users and computers, let me go ahead and go to a Windows XP workstation, which has started up and logged on under this policy. And we'll see that we do indeed have the certificates installed now. Now, I've just logged on as Phoenix User 01 on this workstation, so it's only able to look at its own personal certificates because this user account is not a local administrator, so I'd have to look at that again later on. But in the meantime, I went ahead and built an MMC console that shows the certificates for the personal store for the user, for the local user here. And here under the certificates for current user, personal certificate store, we do indeed have a certificate for Phoenix User 01, which can be used for the purposes that you see listed right there. Then let me also point out that in order to automatically get a certificate through auto-enrollment, you have to have permissions configured on a certificate template that allows auto-enrollment. And that's kind of a subject for a different day, but just be aware of that. You do have to have auto-enrollment as a security permission on a certificate template. Oh, let's also take a look at the trusted root CAs. And if we look at those certificates, we'll see that indeed we do have one for DC Nugget 1 here, so that it can be used for all of the issuance and application policies. That's pretty broad application for that certificate that we also configured under our auto-enrollment policy under the computer configuration. And now quickly I logged off as that user, Phoenix User 01, and logged back on as an administrator so I could open up the certificates for the local computer to show you that there's also a certificate for this computer again, which I didn't manually install this. This was done through auto-enrollment, and it did not require any administrator intervention on my part. Now let me go back up here to our computer configuration settings and complete this. And again, we're not going to address all of these, but there's a key one here that I want you to understand under Windows templates, administrative templates, Windows components, and Windows Update, which right now you'll see that these are not configured on this specific OU. And for that, I'm going to cancel out of this and go instead to the domain policy because I went ahead and configured this kind of in a one-for-all policy because I knew that I was going to want to have a security update server to automatically distribute updates to any organization unit throughout my entire enterprise, so I configured that on the default domain policy. Now, some people say, oh, don't ever touch the default domain policy. What if you mess it up? It's not a policy that it can never be deleted. It'll be prevented. The system will not let you delete it. But I say that as long as you're competent and you know what you're doing, then you can configure some policies on the default domain policy itself that you know you're going to keep forever and that you want to apply in a broad scope. Let me show you one other thing here, though, by the way. Let me go back to that interface. If you wanted to add an additional policy here, then I could say, call this supplemental domain policy or something. And if I have more than one policy in the same location here, then the one that's in the highest on the list has the highest priority. So if there's a setting here that conflicts with the setting here, then the default domain policy will win because it has a higher precedence. Now let me go ahead and delete that before I forget. Now let's go ahead and go back now to the Group Policy Object Editor where I was about to take you to the Administrative Templates, Windows Components, and Windows Update. And here we just need to identify where we're going for our software update services. First of all, let me just open a browser where I've already installed software update services, and we could just go to my existing SUS server, and we just access it by going to HTTP and whatever the name of the server is, followed by /SUS admin. And then what we're going to do is be able to look at this update server. This is a replacement for Microsoft's own update service where you click on Windows Update here, typically using Windows Explorer, and where it asks you to search for the updates and pick updates to install and all that stuff. Well, that's an extranet. That's an internet connection that Microsoft runs, whereas I might rather use this instead, HTTP my name of my server followed by sysadmin, because what I can do is to synchronize the server, which means that it will download all of the updates from Microsoft, and then I can approve whichever ones I want. If there's an update that I'm not sure I like yet or that we haven't tested with our applications, I just won't approve it. Maybe this one we don't like, it's got a problem of some kind. Well, I just won't select a checkbox. That way it won't be deployed to all of my users. Now, in reality, all of mine are just fine. Once it's done, once I've approved it, I just click on approve to approve any of the updates that I've downloaded, and there's hundreds of them, by the way. Then once I've done that, now any of those updates, I'm going to click OK to go ahead and close that. Any of those updates can be distributed by means of any Windows Update policies that I configure in the Group Policy Object Editor. And then let's just briefly go through these policies. And if I double-click on the first one, and again, you see I've already configured these in advance, it's enabled automatic updates. And what it will do is automatically download and schedule the install at 8 o'clock every day on any of my clients that are subject to the scope of this policy, which in my case is the entire domain. I could have also done one of these other ones, notify for download and notify for install, but you have to be an administrator in order to install them. Or auto-download and notify for install. Again, you'd have to be a local administrator in order to be able to install them. So I just auto-download and schedule the install. Users usually don't even know that the updates have been installed, and they're just done. So it makes it very simple, and you can specify any time that you want within a 24-hour period, and you can also specify how frequently you want them to be installed on a daily basis or only certain days of the week and so forth. Now, the next setting that we configure here identifies the specific SUS server that I want to get the updates from, and then beyond that, we can wait 5 minutes after the system's startup. If we've missed any updates in the past, then it'll just wait 5 minutes and go ahead and apply the updates that we didn't get, because if I go back to a previous setting here, the computer was turned off at 8 o'clock in the morning. Since it was turned off at 8 o'clock in the morning, next time I start it up, maybe a couple of days, at 10 o'clock in the morning, it'll wait 5 minutes, then apply the updates. And then finally, a lot of those updates now will require a restart. We can configure this so that we will not automatically restart after scheduled automatic update installations. That may prevent users from accidentally losing data that they did not save prior to an automatic restart. So by enabling this policy, we're just going to depend upon the users to restart their computers on a periodic basis. Now, we're going to talk about software distribution next. And before we do that, let me just point out that if you have a other product that does software distribution for you, a product that you've purchased from a third party, or maybe systems management server from Microsoft, SMS 2003, for example, those products typically do a better job of distributing software than group policy objects. However, GPOs are already included with the product. All you have to do is create them. So it's basically free. And they do a reasonably good job, even up to medium to sometimes enterprise size organizations. It's just that those other third-party products can be much more granular. They can have a much higher level of criteria for who gets the policies, who doesn't, who gets the software, that is, who doesn't get the software. Other things such as bandwidth throttling, so that it can only use a certain amount of bandwidth to download the updates to the clients and so forth. But for our purposes, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the Phoenix OU and go to its properties to go to the group policy. And what I'm about to do here, really, is to open up this policy to deploy Office XP. And then what we'll do next after that is we're going to go to the Phoenix Users organizational unit here, and we're going to configure another policy that will update Office XP to Office 2003. We'll edit this Phoenix policy here, and what we want to do is we can choose a couple of different ways of going about this. Number one, we could choose to assign the software, or we could choose to publish the software. If I assign the software, that means that it is required, and it will also set up an advertisement, so that an advertisement means that if a user clicks on Start Programs, then they'll be able to see Microsoft Office somewhere in the Start menu. There'll be a shortcut for that. And all of the registry settings will be downloaded in advance to the client. That gives them the ability then to click on the shortcut on the Start menu, and it will then recognize that it needs to install that application. And then Windows Installer Service will then download all it needs to install that application on the user's computer, and the user does not need to be an administrator for that. Because it's kind of been pre-approved administratively through the fact that it is in a group policy object. Now that's the behavior of an assigned application. That means that you don't have any choice. If I assign it to computer configuration, I go to software installation here, and if I assign a new software installation package here, then during startup, it will install the application on whichever computers are subject to the policy. I could do the same thing under user configuration and software installation. This means that the software will install itself after the user has started to log on. And this way, even if the user is able to remove it through add remove programs, the next time they log on, it'll just reinstall itself again anyway. Now, before we actually do the software installation, let me talk about the source files as well. You see here I've got a CD inserted into the CD-ROM tray. It's the Office XP CD-ROM. But what I really want to do is to take all of these source files and put them on a software distribution point, which is going to be a shared folder to which users will have at least read access, and that way they'll be able to install the applications. Now, what I want to do is to take all these files and dump them into that shared point, and I could just copy and paste them into there. But there's a more elegant way of doing this, because you remember that many applications, such as Office XP, Office 2003, require a CD key. This is kind of a free bonus. You don't have to know this, but I think it's very administratively efficient, so I'm going to go ahead and show it to you. What I'll do here is I'll go to command prompt, and I want to use setup to automatically copy those files in there along with the CD key in advance. So I'll do, what drive letter was that over here? Let's see, that was drive letter M. So I'll go to drive letter M, and I'll do setup /A. Now, having done that, it's going to launch setup for me, and it's going to package it along with the product key and a destination location of my choice. So I'm going to go ahead and designate this location for the software destination, and then I'm going to enter in a product key. And no, I'm not going to do it in front of you. I know how you people are. Pretty soon I'll have my volume license keys all over the internet. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in offline, and then I'll go ahead and click on next, and we'll continue. And then, of course, you have to agree to the license agreement in advance, and then you click Install, and now it's going to just go ahead and install all those files to that distribution point, and it's going to have them automatically include the volume license key. Then, when I have this automatically installed to my destination clients, no one has to enter in a CD key. Now that's already gone ahead and installed, and I've done the same thing to Office 2003 in the background here and offline. Now I'm going to go to right-click here and choose a new package underneath the computer configuration for software installation. And with this, I can only choose to browse for the files. I don't want them to be local files. You really must locate these across the network. So don't go through my computer and then data and then the local location right here or right here. That would be wrong, because that's locating it on the drive D, and that will tell all your clients to also locate these files on their own D drives. And since that's not how it's going to be done, we need to go through a UNC path, and we can do that also by double-clicking our way through Network Neighborhood. And then we can find our Office XP installation, and the MSI file that installs this is proplus.msi. Now I can make this an assigned application, which again means that it's going to be required by all of the computers that no one really has any choice in the matter. I can't make it published because this makes it available through add remove programs, and my computers don't on their own know how to go to add remove programs. That's an interface thing that somebody with brain cells must determine that they need to click on. So we can only make it assigned. We can also make it advanced, which has to do things such as modifications that we might want to make to it if we had a transform file. And you can create transform files using Office resource kits, which will determine exactly what pieces of various applications you want installed and where you want default directories to be and things like that. It's a little bit outside of our scope, but it's pretty easy to work with, and I recommend seriously that you download it and run those Office resource kits to be able to get those transform files. They're very handy. You'll go ahead and click OK here for the assigned application, and then once we've done that, we're going to see that it locates it now within the policy for us here. Let's go ahead and double click on this so we can look first of all at just general information on the first tab, which doesn't really give us much of anything, but on the deployment tab we see that we can uninstall this application when it falls out of the scope of management. So for example, right now we're configuring this on the Phoenix policy, which applies to all the Phoenix sub-OUs as well. If we were to move the computer account to which this applies to a different organizational unit that was not subject to this policy, it would automatically uninstall it. And then we can also configure this for upgrades. We'll look at that a little bit later on when we also work with Office 2003. We can look at various categories. You can configure categories to be installed so that under Add Remove Programs, users are able to identify various categories like accounting or accounts receivable or marketing or anything like that. Then for modifications, we don't have that available to us right now because we did not install this as an advanced package. If we had done that at the outset, we would be able to add modification files which customize the way that it's installed. And then you can use the security tab to more granularly control to whom this package applies. So that if you did not want a specific security group to receive this software, then you could deny them the ability to read this package. Now then here on this computer client 01, all I did was just start it up and log on as just a generic user, Phoenix user 01. Notice that I have an icon from Microsoft Outlook on the desktop. That's a good sign. That probably means that this application has been installed or at least advertised. In this case, I see, for example, Microsoft Word. Let's go ahead and start Microsoft Word. Now here again, as I mentioned, when you assign applications, it advertises it, making it look as if it's been installed when it really hasn't been. So as soon as I try to launch Microsoft Word, it just copies down any files necessary to run Word, and then it gives you this stuff. And then since the CD key has already been installed, that's pretty much all I need to do besides entering this information in and clicking OK. Now I can also launch an application even though I might not have all of the program files installed already on my system here. Remember that I do have all the registry entries. By the way, the registry entries are what's going to give me the ability to right-click here and choose a new one of these Microsoft Office applications. This Microsoft PowerPoint presentation is only available because of the registry entries. And then also it has a Microsoft PowerPoint icon on the Start menu. So anyway, I can start this new Microsoft PowerPoint presentation, and because it has a .ppt extension, just by double-clicking on this, document invocation will automatically associate it with PowerPoint and launch the PowerPoint application for me. Well, now it's time to upgrade from Office XP to Office 2003. So what I can do now is to right-click here and choose a new package. And we're going to include an upgrade package now, Office 2003, across the network distribution location here that we went to earlier, the software distribution update location. Then we're going to go ahead and assign this application as well. We'll notice that because it's in the same location as Office XP Professional, it's able to automatically recognize that it's an upgrade to that previous application. And in fact, you can see that by virtue of that little up arrow on the icon for Microsoft Office Professional Edition 2003 here. And if I double click on it and go to upgrades, we can see that indeed it is going to upgrade to Office XP Professional application here. So now the next time I restart that computer, client 01, and log on to it again, we'll see that it is upgrading to Office Professional Edition 2003. Now here I decided to go ahead and open Windows Task Manager to show you the local area network connection traffic here. We see that we're getting 10, 20 megabits per second across the wire. And why is that? Because I restarted that computer, client 01. So right now it's actually installing the upgraded package for Microsoft Office Professional 2003. Oops, didn't mean to double click it. But anyway, that's what it's installing right now. And as soon as it's done, and we don't have to wait till it's done, but I'm just going to wait till it's done, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at that package. Now let me also point out that if we later on determine that we want to uninstall any of the software, all we have to do is to right-click on it here and choose All Tasks, and then choose Remove, and then we have two options to select from. Immediately uninstall the software from users and computers, and that's pretty much it. Or allow the users to continue to use the software. In other words, don't uninstall it, but just prevent new installations. And that would be simply because the policy would no longer exist to install new applications. And that's pretty much all there is to that. Now, here again, I've logged on to client 01 after I restarted it, and hopefully it's refreshed its policy. I think that it did install the files because we looked at the network traffic a little while ago, even though that was kind of a rudimentary way of looking at that network traffic. Again, we noticed that now the Microsoft Office from, Office XP are missing now because in Office 2003, it puts it in its own program group here. So we're observing this here. If we go to Microsoft Word now, it says Word 2003, and it looks like it's going to go ahead and give it to us. Now, by the way, most of the files are already actually on the system. What it's building at that point where you see the progress bars is stuff that it has to build in because of individual user profile settings, because it will make some settings unique to this individually logged on user. Now, one thing we saw from our last nugget was that people have this solitaire game, and this person has the solitaire icon on the desktop, and they just double-click it, and they just get started playing it. You know, there's no stopping these people once they get going, because the game's kind of addicting, and nobody seems to be able to. Well, I can't seem to get a very good start here. But anyway, we want to get rid of the game. How are we going to be able to do that? Well, you could delete it as an administrator. You could delete sol.exe from the system directory. However, the secret there is, because of recovery capabilities that are automatically built into Windows 2000 and later, it'll actually restore the file automatically, even if you permanently delete it without putting it in the recycle bin. And I like that. So there's no getting rid of the file itself from that respect. So what else could you do? You could go back into your group policy editor, go down to the Windows settings, security settings, and for the computer configuration, go down to software restriction policies, and there's another setting also under Windows settings and security settings, and again, software restriction policies under the user configuration as well. And just as you might guess, if it's a software restriction that you want to apply to the computer regardless of who logs on, then you would do it at this level underneath the computer configuration node. If you want it to be available only to specific users and blocked to others, then you would go to the software restriction policies under the user configuration node. Let's just say that we want to block it for all users regardless of who you are on these computers within the scope of management. Now to do this, I can use one of 4 criteria to block that particular application. Well, what I need to do first is to right-click on this and choose a new software restriction policy. And then once I've gotten into this, I can take a look at the security levels that we've got configured by default. And right now it's unrestricted, which means that there's really nothing restricted if I just leave this policy as it is, and that's its default. Now if it's on a more locked down computer like a kiosk, I would right click here and set this as default for disallowed. That means all software is prohibited regardless, and I would only allow certain kinds of software in that restriction. Now what I'm going to do here is go to the software restriction policies, and go to additional rules here. Then this is where I'm going to configure that I want to not run sol.exe. I can right click here to choose a new certificate rule, which I have to use. I have to have some programming capabilities there because I have to use a piece from Microsoft from the SDK, Software Development Kit, called Capicom, which is something that we can use to associate certificates with things such as scripts. In any case, that's how we would make that certificate rule work. Then we could do a new hash rule. This is going to be pretty handy and probably a fairly common rule that we can configure. What this does is it takes an actual executable and runs all of its bits through a kind of a hash blender, and out of the result of that, it generates a unique hash based on the bits of that application. And I lost my right click there. Here we go. Now I could do a new internet zone rule as well so that I can prohibit applications based upon which internet zone they come from, and a new path rule as well, which is kind of easy to circumvent because if I do a path rule and I prohibit C:\\/ Windows system32 sol.exe, well then a savvy user will just copy that sol.exe file and paste it elsewhere and run it from there. So probably one of the more common ones that we're going to be using is going to be the new hash rule that we can use here, and I'll just browse for that one. I'm going to go to Windows System32 across the network. So I've gone across to client 01 to an administrative share of $C$ here, System32, and I'm just going to quickly go for sol.exe, and there it is. Now once I click it, it'll kind of take a moment here to pause while it runs it through the blender, and there it is. Now this is the unique hash that it sends through the hash blender, if you will. And from this point on, that application will not be able to be run because when we attempt to run it, it'll match this hash and it will be prevented from running. Now, the only thing to keep in mind with this is if this is an application that gets updates frequently or something like that, probably Solitaire won't, but other applications that you might not want users to run, well, when they get updated, then the hash is going to be a different value, and then they'll suddenly be able to start running it again. So you might have to keep on top of this in terms of potential updates for applications. Then, of course, the security level is disallowed as opposed to unrestricted. Unrestricted would just mean that you could run it. We'll just make it disallowed, click OK, and that's pretty much it. Now what I'm going to do is to go ahead and reboot client 01, and after it's bounced, I'm going to log back onto it again to see if we can run Solitaire. And now here I've logged back on as Phoenix User 01 to Client 01. There's the Solitaire shortcut that still points to the same location as we saw earlier. I'll go ahead and double click on this, and now we see that it can't do it. Please contact your system administrator. It's been restricted, blah, blah, blah. So that effectively stops that application from running. In this nugget, we talked about group policy objects, and this was part 2, where we started off with just kind of a policy review because we skipped around in policies a little bit. I wanted to take you a little bit more systematically through each node, and that's what we did, and a big part of that was the security settings. We need to know some things about the security settings so we can know where to configure things such as auditing, so we can figure out where to configure our event logs, our password policies, all those kinds of things, and very importantly, how to configure certificate auto-enrollment. Now, we've had some level of enrollment in the past. In Windows Server 2003, we now have auto-enrollment that can take place for both the user and the computer. We also took a look at software update services settings. There's 4 key policies for that within group policy. And this will allow you to have your clients automatically update themselves with the latest security updates from Microsoft off of a software update services server. We also took a look at software distribution, automatically deploying software, as well as updating one version of software to the next, and also took a look at software restrictions so that we can make sure that users cannot run a particular piece of software that we don't want them to be able to run. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.